Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Second Presbyterian Church. For those of you who are here in our pews and those who are joining us online, we are delighted that you are here for Evening Vacation Bible School. And I could not be more thrilled to experience this annual tradition in person once again. So thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us on the live stream. If you are joining us online, the Reverend Ben Brannon, our Associate Pastor for Youth and Young Adults, is managing our online chat feature. So if you have any comments or questions as we go throughout the evening, you may post those there, and he'll be sure to hold on any questions you might have, so we might toss them Andrew's way, maybe by the end of the evening if they come up. My name's Elizabeth Link, and I'm the Executive Pastor here, and Dr. George Anderson, our Senior Minister, is in the pew. He'll be introducing Andrew tomorrow. But our guest speaker, as you're all aware, is Andrew Whaley from Raleigh Presbyterian Church. I'll share a little bit more about Andrew in just a moment, but I want to give a special thanks as well to Mitch Wiziger, who's the organist at Raleigh Pres. He is here with us tonight and is managing the organ back here behind us. Mitch, we're so grateful you're here. Thank you for your gift this evening. And Andrew's wife, Rebecca, is here as well. Rebecca, if you want to wave. And there are a few folks from Raleigh Pres that have joined us this evening. We're so delighted you've come. I just want to give you a little bit of information about how this evening will go. Andrew will share with us, and he has some. Each evening will be a little bit different, but he has some things that'll be on the screens or the wall, projected on the wall behind us that we'll get to engage. He'll invite us to engage with each other some during the week. It's really going to be a great opportunity to be with one another, to learn together. These 4 nights are really a gift. Now, I met Andrew in the spring of 2012. He was a Trent Symposium participant, as was I. That was my first year here in Roanoke. He was serving a church in Jefferson City, Tennessee. That's where he and his wife, Rebecca, lived. They have 3 children. They have Simon, Joanna, and Ruth, and they're precious. And they're also neighbors of ours, by the way, so I'm grateful to get to call Andrew and Rebecca friends as well. But Andrew has been serving at Raleigh Presbyterian Church for about 5 years. How long? 6 years. It'll be 6 years this year. And I also heard the news that yesterday was his 10-year ordiversary. In case you don't know that word, ordiversary is a word for anniversary of ordination. So thank you, Andrew, for spending. And now when I invited Andrew to be our guest speaker, George and I talked a bit about who we might invite for this year. We knew that we wanted it to be someone that was good, that was smart, engaging, energetic, theologically grounded. And we also knew we wanted it to be someone relatively local, because 6 months ago we did not know what the travel life would be like in COVID. And we are so grateful for this miracle of vaccine that allows us to be together. But truthfully, George and I both felt like whether or not we had to fly Andrew across the country to get here or have him drive across town, he is just as desirable a guest speaker. So we're grateful for what he has prepared for us tonight and in the days to come. And we look forward to the evening's educational opportunity, but also to the fellowship that will follow. In case you didn't see it, Robin Hobbs has set up a lovely reception for us in Kirk Hall. So we invite you to stick around after tonight's program, get to know each other, get to know Andrew a little bit, and just have a wonderful time this evening. Let's join our hearts together in prayer. Holy God, we come tonight to hear your word made clear to us. This hour is a gift, and we give thanks for the time we have set aside to sit at your feet. We give thanks for the gift of your holy word, and we hope to stretch ourselves to grow a deeper understanding of what you ask of us as your beloved children. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, George, and Second Presbyterian Church for having me. Am I on, Andrea? Oh, it's yellow. What is that?
Yellow's mute.
I'm muted. Right. Am I better now? There we are. Hello, in internet land as well. Elizabeth, thank you for that introduction. George, thank you for the invitation. It's a delight to be here to reconnect and connect with members of Second Presbyterian Church. There are quite a few faces of yours that are familiar to me, whether it's through presbytery activities or we share families across congregations. I was grateful to see that Bev Fitzpatrick was finishing a Mountain Dew as he got here, so maybe he'll snore a little less loudly than he does during Dr. Anderson's sermons. So it's good to be here. It's good to know this congregation and the good work for God that you all do in the world. When I was invited to lead this adult vacation Bible school, I was encouraged to pick a biblical theme of my choosing. And so I'm hopeful that the theme of my interest aligns with something that might be of interest to you all. That doesn't always happen. But we're going to hope that it does tonight. But I'll give you thanks at least for the chance to explore something more that I'm passionate about. And I hope that it will become something that you're engaged with and interested in over this time together. In particular, over the next 4 evenings, we're going to be exploring mostly content from the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. Not books that we're often the most familiar with. From the Hebrew Bible. So perhaps this will be new material for you or something that you studied maybe a long time ago in some Presbyterian women's study or something that will be helped to be re-engaged over this time that we're together. I picked this book because I think there are lessons here that we can navigate through to see what lessons we can learn for navigating challenging times in our own day, both in our personal life, our family life, professional life, even our national life together. So why 1st and 2nd Kings for this time that we share? This narrative largely explores a long season of decay of the institutions that define Israel. There has been a turning away of the cultural and official institutions that define the people of Israel, and we see the nation crumble over a period of several hundred years. We see what happens when a community begins to ignore the faithfulness of its institutions. But before we explore the decay, I want to do a little Bible review. And it's going to be a review for most of you, but I want to make it somewhat interactive so that I don't just put you to sleep, but it's good to rehash sometimes the biblical narrative while we're together. And so I was a theater major in college. I was in a host of musicals in my day. And so we're going to do a musical theater retelling of the biblical narrative. There's no soft shoe, but we are going to talk and sing together. So you're going to want to pull out the hymnal in your pew, because I'm not doing this show for you. We're going to do this together. And so we're going to talk through the biblical narrative, and we're going to sing our way through the biblical narrative. I want to thank Mitch Wisiger, again, our Director of Music Ministries at Raleigh Court Presbyterian, for being here with me tonight. This really feeds my ego of being sort of the Billy Graham, George Beverly Shea, traveling show. So it's fun to be able to say I come with a musician when I show up. So a big thanks to Mitch for being here and helping us to explore this story together. So our narrative starts as the story of Israel begins in Egypt, right? The people have become slaves of the Pharaoh there. They have been tasked with building incredible numbers of bricks for the Pharaoh's building campaign to run his economy, and they are breaking under the burden of their labor. And so they cry out to God, and God responds with Moses and sends Moses to the Pharaoh. So, turn in your hymnal to hymn 51. We're going to sing stanzas 1 and 3 of when Israel was in, 52, hymn 52. When Israel was in Egypt's land, stanzas 1 and 3. in Egypt's land. Let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. Let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. With the words of Moses, we establish the first institution that will come to define Israel, and that's the voice of the prophet. The prophet is the one who speaks for God, speaks on God's behalf, and brings a word of critique and criticism to the governmental and organizing powers of the nation. In this case, that's the Pharaoh. And with Moses as leader, the people of Israel enter into what we want to call a dynamic relationship with God. This is God who is on the move. This is God who is active. This is a God who you pray to and God responds. This is a God of power. This is a God who acts in the moment. The people are in this dynamic, this movement-oriented relationship with God. And so they depart Egypt. They're guided by a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night on this dynamic journey through the wilderness. As they journey on their way, they arrive at Mount Sinai. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and he receives the 10 Commandments. So we see here that the people are relying on God for their guidance, to take them where they need to go. They're not trusting in themselves, they're trusting in the one who makes this way possible in the wilderness. So as we journey with the people in this dynamic relationship with God, I invite you to turn to hymn 65, and we're going to sing stanza 1 of Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. So there on Mount Sinai, God gives the law, most notably those 10 Commandments. But importantly for our study over these 4 nights, God gives instruction for both the tabernacle, which is the tent of meeting. If you ever read the details of putting together the tabernacle, it's going to make the renovation y'all did 9 years ago look like a piece of cake. Because everybody's got their job, their role, who carries the poles, who carries the canvas, how many pomegranates have to be on every piece of fabric. I mean, it's amazing. So you get these instructions for the tent of meeting where the dynamic God will travel with the people. And then you have established this class within Israel who's going to be set apart for the purpose of carrying out the sacred rituals that will keep the people connected to the dynamic God who guides them. So God speaks to the people in Exodus chapter 28, verses 1 and 2, and verse 35. I've got them up here if you can read them. So Exodus 28, 1 and 2, and verse 35, God says, "Then bring near to you your brother Aaron and his sons with him from among the Israelites to serve me as priests. Aaron and Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. You shall make sacred vestments for the glorious adornment of your brother Aaron." And then over to verse 35. "And make an incense." That's not the verse I wanted. I don't know what verse I wanted in chapter. Oh, I turned too many pages. There we go. There's verse 35. "Aaron shall wear these vestments when he ministers, and its sound shall be heard when he goes into the holy place before the Lord, and when he comes out, so that he may not die." So these priests are set apart to go into the tabernacle to offer these sacrifices. I skipped over a lot of like what their clothes are supposed to look like. But note that God designates Aaron, Moses' brother, not Moses himself. Moses has his role within the community. He is the prophet. Aaron, the brother, a different character, is charged with maintaining this office of the priesthood, who carries out these holy rituals. Again, in the book of Leviticus, chapter 9, we read about Aaron's priesthood being inaugurated. This is Leviticus 9, verses 1 to 7. "On the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, 'Take a bull calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and offer them before the Lord. And say to the people of Israel, take a male goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering mixed with oil, for today the Lord will appear to you.' They brought what Moses commanded to the front of the tent of meeting, and the whole congregation drew near and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, 'This is the thing the Lord commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you.' Then Moses said to Aaron, 'Draw near to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, and make atonement for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the offering of the people, and make atonement for them as the Lord has commanded.'" So you have this special instruction given to the Israelite people while they're still in this dynamic relationship with God in the wilderness, the establishment of the priesthood. Aaron is designated for the task. Their role is to mediate between God and the people in this ongoing relationship of trust and provision, to remind the people again and again of the story that has formed them out of the Exodus, that they worship a God who provides for them, who cares for them, and who covenants to be with them. So joining in with the priesthood, I want you to turn to hymn number 4, and we're going to sing stanza 1 of that hymn, "Holy God, we praise your name." And so the people make their way through the wilderness. They arrive at the promised land. Moses dies. Leadership is passed to Joshua, and the people finally enter into the land of Canaan, into the promised land. We enter that season of the judges, these charismatic leaders who were sometimes faithful to God. More often than not, they were not faithful to God. They just kind of rescued them from oppression by other neighbors. But the people of Israel are still loosely configured. There are these 12 tribes. One of them is designated now to be priests. They're trying to figure out where their borders are of their lands. They're constantly being taken over by their neighbors in this various chaotic life, and they're trying to find their way. So ultimately, the people come to the point in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 to 9. They cry out for a king. And so we have the third institution of Israel to guide them. We had the prophet established with Moses, who goes before the Pharaoh, his brother Aaron established as the priest to carry out the holy rituals with God. And now the people cry out for a king. Now, if you look at these verses, God's not real happy that the people have said this, right? So kingship in Israel is always a mixed relationship. God voices, I feel that they have rejected me as their king by demanding that we have a king like other nations. But God ultimately concedes and allows for kingship within the nation. We see the failure of kingship immediately in Saul, the first king that's chosen, but then we see kingship better lived out in the character of David, the man after God's own heart. David is an interesting character. He's a hinge character. David is shifting the people from the dynamic, on-the-move relationship they've had with God in the wilderness into a more established, patterned, static relationship with God that now happens within a promised land, with the tribes united, with borders around them, with economic prosperity and stability, with regular practices of worship. But we still read in David's story this ongoing communion that he has with God directly, like Moses of old, but we're slowly moving out of the dynamic tabernacle years and moving into the institution years of the temple. That temple, of course, is constructed by David's son, Solomon, and Solomon really represents what the people at that time thought was the zenith, the high point of being the covenant people. They have finally arrived. They are experiencing unprecedented economic prosperity under Solomon. Their borders are secure because they have a standing army. They've established treaties and trade agreements with neighboring nations that have allowed them to make more money and to get the things that they need there. And so, celebrating the final culmination of the temple, turn with me to hymn 385. We're going to sing stanzas 1 and 3 of All People That on Earth Do Dwell. And so we've arrived at the three roles: prophet, priest, and king, established through a long period of dynamic relationship with God, now becoming institutionalized with the capital city in Jerusalem and the temple. And what we know from sociology and human history and cultural studies is that any kind of revolutionary moment and movement, as it becomes more established and prosperous and institutionalized, the harder it is to maintain that dynamism, and the easier it is to begin jockeying for power, manipulating from underneath, bending the institution to benefit some instead of others, turning the institution away from the purposes for which it was designed and toward the benefit of those who operate and run the institution. So before we go into that decay period, let's talk about what the ideal would look like for the prophet, priest, and king. And to that, I am deeply grateful for the work of the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of England. He is not an unfamiliar name in this sanctuary. The book that this comes from, George and I read together in our Bible study, Lessons in Leadership by Rabbi Sacks, where he talks about shared leadership in Israel. This passage, it's about 6 pages long, has really dominated my thinking about how human beings relate to and live with each other for the past couple of years. This prophet, priest, and king. Here's how Jonathan Sacks describes each of those roles in the nation of Israel. The king, unlike the Pharaoh, unlike the other gods in Mesopotamia, the king in Israel is never to be considered a demigod or one who represents God directly to the people. The king in Israel is charged principally with carrying out the use of secular power. So the king is to provide for the apparatus, the architecture of justice in the land, and to provide order and security for the people. The kingship also is dynastic. It's carried out for one generation to the next, so therefore it is obviously a part of the establishment. To be a king is to be part of the establishment people. The priest is also dynastic, like the king, the descendants of Aaron, as we read. So the priestly class is also part of the establishment. They have special uniforms that designate their role. They keep doing the same festivals and rituals consistently over time. Sacks talks about how the priests are concerned mostly with kairos time. Y'all familiar with that word, chronos time and kairos time? Kairos time is the eternal time of God. So the festivals, the seasons, the eternal will of God, they help the people lift their vision above the present moment and to the eternal moment, to raise them into a posture of trust in God's provision and care. The priests keep the kairos time. They're set apart. The priests lived apart from the rest of the people, carrying out their work in the temple. So you have the king is an establishment role, dynastic. The priest is an establishment role, dynastic. But what we know and what God knows and what Israel knows is that when you have an establishment that is dynastic, it is prone to corruption. And so the prophet role, that first role that Moses embodied, is an essential part of Israel's makeup as well. The prophet is not dynastic. Nobody's the son of a prophet, so therefore I'm a prophet. The prophet is always a charismatic leader, one who's raised up. The prophet doesn't live separate from the people like the king and the priest. The prophet comes from among the people. He doesn't have a special uniform or a crown that he wears, but is adorned just like everyone else. Unlike the priest who's concerned with the kairos time, that eternal time of God, the prophet is very concerned with chronos time, the now moment. Where is God's will being enacted right now, or what impediment is getting in the way of God's justice being enacted right now? So you have these three roles. The king is concerned principally with power. This is the brief summary. King is responsible for having secular power. The priest is concerned essentially with holiness before God. The prophet is concerned principally with fidelity to God in the physical actions of the nation. In this way, When Israel is living where these three roles are mutually informing each other and being held in tension with one another, it's like a piece of counterpoint music. Y'all familiar with counterpoint music? You have multiple lines that could stand alone as melody lines, but they're able to be woven together and be played at the same time. Sometimes there's friction between the notes. Sometimes they expand the melody line. So I'm going to have you listen to a piece of counterpoint in just a second. But first, I want to give Mitch a chance to just play each line short on its own so that then you're able to listen to how all three play together through the piece. So give us part one, Mitch. Okay, that's part one. That's your first voice. Then your second voice. And then your third voice. Three lines. Now, some of y'all are on the Chancel Guild. Don't get out the Advent wreath, okay? I know, Vach it auf, it's Advent time. Some of y'all know this piece. I want you to listen to these three melodies. See how you see them weave together. And I don't know, maybe imagine which voice sounds to you like a prophet, a priest, or a king as we listen together. Thanks, Mitch. So you hear in the music how it almost feels like the three lines are in conversation with each other, and sometimes one backs off, one is more pronounced or more prominent. This is the goal of leadership within Israel, of prophet, priest, and king. But as I said in our opening words, those tensions and counter information that's to be the goal is very rarely exercised faithfully in the nation. The institutions fall apart. Now, before we move forward, a quick question I do want a response. When you hear about three institutions that are supposed to check and balance each other, what comes to your mind? Yeah, the United States government, right? The executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Don't go there. Here's why. I don't think it's right. In our country, and this is where we're going to draw these parallels and these connections. In our country, we don't have a king yet. But we have a government which is designed to operate with secular power, establishing justice, systems of fairness, and infrastructure to allow for peaceful life together. That includes the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. That is one of the pillar institution parallels that I am hoping to draw while we're together. But I also think in different ways we have priestly and prophetic roles within our society as well. And our ability to thrive as a people is dependent on our ability to honor those different roles within the society, to understand their value, and to speak openly, candidly, sometimes in tension with one another, in order to have a dynamic relationship with God, as we would know God, to guide us into the way that God would want us to live. But what we're finding is that these institutions that have guided us, prophetic, priestly, and kingly institutions, have been falling into decay. And that there's a great mistrust. I'm sure many of you all are familiar with the New York Times columnist David Brooks. He wrote a book several years ago called The Second Mountain. And giving sort of a brief summary of that book in a TED Talk, he talked about this mistrust and this institutional decay that we've seen around us. And Andrea is going to play for us a brief clip from that presentation. The people at home couldn't see that. So tomorrow night at 6:30 in the sanctuary, you can be here. You can also find that TED Talk online. If you just look up David Brooks, I think it's 2018 TED Talk. But he talks about in that clip the economic, environmental, political, and social crisis. I think that crisis comes when these three institutions, the prophet role, priest role, and king role, are so disrupted, neglected, or abused that we're no longer able to hold one another in a relationship of trust. So as we wrap up tonight, I want to put us into three groups. Yes, perfect timing. We're only going to do this for about 7 or 8 minutes, so I'm going to divide up the groups. This side of the room minus Elizabeth, because you don't get to have two pastors in one group. Elizabeth, if you'll join this pew back, and if this pew up. Now, this is where you're supposed to be around tables in the fellowship hall, but we're not. So you're going to have to sort of awkwardly turn toward each other for a conversation. And I apologize that that's not more agreeable, but this is where we are so that we can be with the people at home. And Ben, you can engage those folks on the chat, hopefully. This group here, you're going to be the king group, okay? So I want you to take 5 minutes and think about the question, how and why has trust in government cracked open in the last 30 years? Somebody might want to pull out their phone or get a piece of paper, write down things since 1990. I don't want you to go back before that have caused people to distrust the kingly role of government over the past 30 years. Your front half of the room, you're going to be the priest group. Again, priests, kairos time, sacred rituals and rhythms and seasons. So thinking about that role as a cultural one, what have been cultural festivals or seasons that have marked us as a nation? And what of those have become flashpoints, cultural fights, or been critiqued over the last 30 years, since 1990? Cultural ones, not necessarily church-related. Does this make sense? Cultural sticking points that have bonded us together as a people, rituals that have been flashpoints or been criticized in recent. And you back group, you're the prophet group. And so your question is to come up with a list of what have been the cries for justice in the past 30 years. What tactics have been used, and how has it been received? Now, 30 years ago, 1990 is as far back as you're allowed to go, okay? So George H.W. Bush is president. You remember this? The first Iraq War is brewing. The Berlin Wall has fallen. MTV is coming out. The 49ers win the Super Bowl with Joe Montana. The Reds win the World Series. The Trailblazers won the NBA championship. I don't remember that. Music, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Prince, Nirvana. This is the world you're going back to. Not fast there, but from 1990 to the present. Where have you seen these things happening? Take about 6-7 minutes. Discuss them with your group. Elizabeth, you can join. Yeah, that one. Okay. It doesn't matter. Yeah, they can just do whatever all together. Yeah. No, I think it's good. No, I think it's been good. All right. Thank you all for doing this so quickly. This was you all are really good brainstormers. Hey, if anybody from Raleigh Court Pres is watching online, these folks are in it. So y'all need to step up your game. These folks are good. What I could overhear was impressive. So just real quick, just a few things from the King list. What are some things that have caused to a cracking of trust in government in the past 30 years?
The preacher shouldn't necessarily be the one speaking, but I'm the only one who thought we would learn something by bringing a paper. Get a microphone.
So people online can hear you.
George Anderson coming to you from Second Presbyterian Church. He said that fine.
There you're good.
That leaders are self-serving, maybe tend to be more self-serving to stay in office more than for the good of the country. Lines of truth blurred. There has been politicians who have promoted celebrity over wisdom. The information age tied to the fact that echo chambers have been created, which is a big part of polarization, which leads to demonization. So if we're talking about lack of trust in the government, almost by definition, you hate half your government from the get-go, just on which side you are. And then the Iraq War, just right in 1990, that we had the whole nation, the country got the whole nation behind it. And we got into this war only to find out there were no weapons of mass destruction. They weren't even connected to Al-Qaeda, and we got bogged down and felt, there was a lot of trust that was lost at that moment that's been hard to recover.
Nice. Thank you all. So also in that vein, you all are hitting on it broadly, but to be specific, you remember when Bill Clinton was asked if he wore boxers or briefs when he ran for president? And George H.W. Bush was scandalized? That's a real shift in governmental trust. And then, of course, the Monica Lewinsky scandal. I wasn't allowed to look at the newspaper in the morning because you didn't know what was going to be in the paper. The war in Afghanistan after 9/11 and everything that played out with that there. The election of 2000 and hanging chads and can we trust elections? The election of 2016, the election of 2020, can we trust elections? How are we going to manipulate the system? This breakdown of trust in that role of government. Thank you all for that. All right, priest group up here. What cultural rituals over the last 30 years have we seen become flashpoints?
Well, I didn't bring paper, but I was given paper and a pencil, so there you go. I get to be the one who... Well, anyway, so what did we talk about? July 4th, patriotic events that used to have more of a central role and now are maybe not being as upheld or celebrated as they once were. Somebody in the group also mentioned about how there used to be more of a, like with some of our celebrations of, Thanksgiving, for example, or Columbus Day, that certainly is changing. We're seeing that change, that there are certainly histories in terms of what happened with Native Americans, that we are now not so readily, celebrating certain things like Thanksgiving. Also, assimilation, that used to be felt that to come into this country, it was important to assimilate to the country and the culture and the ways, and that is really being looked at differently now. There was also a mention of there's so much change from being an industrial and agrarian society to more to a tech society. So there were values and elements of our culture that were having to do with industrial and agrarian society that are not so valued now. More of a value with shifting to the tech society. Was there anything else?
That is great. Thank you all for that. So you see that y'all mentioned sort of the rise of social media, so how we and who has a voice has shifted. You've seen, outside of rituals such as holidays like July 4th, somebody mentioned kneeling near the national anthem being a shift in how things are interpreted in the country. Even in other cultural ways, like remember the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa in 1998, and then we found out they were using steroids the whole time? That just like blew open like the nation's pastime of baseball. Or that Bronco in 1994 driving down the interstate with O.J. Simpson in it, right? We can't make athletes heroes anymore. We can't celebrate these things anymore. These are sort of priestly rituals that have now become challenged. Rituals such as professional sports that unify people around a game and this sort of thing that brings people together in this way in the country that have come under fire to not be as pure as we thought they would be. So those things, whether it's national holidays or how we honor those days or pastimes or activities has shifted too. Our prophet group, what are some major issues that have been pressed over the past 30 years?
I'll speak from our prophet group. There were a lot. We actually could have kept going, but we thought about the cries for justice coming from Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ+, racial rights, immigration, cries for justice after 9/11, environmental justice, healthcare rights, American Indian rights, and then we had to think about what tactics have been used. We thought about how social media has really changed the platform, and cries for social justice and change, social media, feet on the ground protests, but that also could include other kinds of protests, like that happen also online, but maybe in where you spend your money or don't spend your money. Talked about terrorism, particularly relates to 9/11, and then riots, lobbying, legislation can be a tactic that can be used, and then even so much as the insurrection.
Nice. So you hear, though, how these three roles, the cultural institutions, the prophetic cry, and the governmental policy, all are somehow related in needing to inform and adapt around each other. And what we've seen is a lot of siloing and infighting to preserve something or adapt something or discredit something as a society. So we see those fractures and those fissures. So the question is, we're going to explore the next 3 nights, is how do you restructure and rebuild and restore trust in institutions and in one another? Is it possible to live with mutual concern and respect? We're going to look at these stories in 1st and 2nd Kings involving kings, priests, and prophets over the next 3 nights to further clarify each of these roles in Israel's history and to see how holding these roles in tension and in balance can help us both in personal relationships that we inhabit, professional ones, family dynamics, as well as national issues that lay before us. I think there's some wisdom here to try to learn from the people of Israel and Judah what not to do so that we can reestablish a dynamic relationship with God and with one another that can move us in the direction that God would take us. So as we wrap up tonight, I'm going to invite us actually to stand and sing together hymn 755, Alleluia, Laud, and Blessing.
Thank you, Andrew. You've certainly given us a lot to think about in this great introduction, and we look forward to the coming 3 nights with you. Mitch, we want to give a special thank you for your gift of music. This has been a joy to punctuate this evening with these songs. And special thank you to Andrea Boone, who is back in the back and has been managing our live stream and our video feed. So thank you, everyone. We are most grateful, and I hope you'll join us in Kirk Hall for a reception. Peace and be well. We hope to see you tomorrow evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.